Good morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Thought I'd talk a little bit about lumber and lumber prices. Now, we have seen the lumber prices moving up quite dramatically, and in fact, it was a lot faster than I was ever anticipating it going to. Now, if you had been watching my videos for the last few months, I said that towards the end of the year, that we were going to see the price increasing. Like we were watching the futures contracts, showing that the January contract was quite elevated comparatively to, like, say, what was going on in July. I did not think it was going to move up to 1069 per thousand that fast. It's been quite a dramatic ride. And it's sending shockwaves through the system. I mean, people are really questioning what it is that's going on out there. Now, I personally believe that a lot of this has to do with speculation, and a lot of it has to do with speculation on what's going on both in British Columbia area and with the tariffs that the United States government has inflicted on Canada. So now I thought about these tariffs for just a minute, because the last time there was tariffs put on Canadian softwood was during the Trump administration, just as the trade wars were starting to heat up. And something that I thought was interesting at the time is that prices were elevated then, and Canada was hit with the tariff. And I thought to myself, man, if that isn't like hitting the American consumer, because really, like, I noticed it in like Western red cedar. This is a particular product that is both, it's a United States product, it's also a Canadian product, but the majority of the Western red cedar that comes into the United States is coming from Canada. And when these tariffs back, during the Trump administration first hit the softwoods of Canada, I noticed it first in the cedar supply. And we started getting cedar from like we started getting Alaskan yellow cedar in for our primed products instead of the typical Western red cedar that we were using. And so immediately they were trying to source out suppliers of this stuff that was outside of the Canadian imports that were coming in. But eventually it all went back to the Canadian imports, because that's the major supplier of Western red cedar, and that's what the people want. But I said it back then. It was just like, man, there's really no other source of this stuff. I mean, yeah, we have domestic suppliers, and the price of this stuff is going to go up, and it's going to benefit the domestic suppliers, but ultimately it's going to hurt the American consumer, as they have to pay ever increasing amounts for this Western red cedar to build their homes or trim out their windows or whatever it is that they're using this stuff for. And it doesn't really like hurt the Canadian government, considering that we really don't have another source for it. So really, it was a benefit, in my opinion, to the Canadian mills, as the price is like the tariffs are just essentially put down onto the bottom line, and a markup is put on it and charged to the end consumer, which was, us, the American consumer. So I looked at these tariffs as like, this is not hurting the Canadian mills. Like, it didn't hurt them. And it was happening during a time that I thought, man, aren't prices already elevated? Is this not going to like just make it ever increasingly more difficult to buy lumber if they do this? And what ended up happening is that there was a slowdown in the lumber purchases, right? And we had a huge crash in the price. And mills were shutting down like crazy up in the British Columbia area. Even here domestically, we had mills that were announcing shutdowns and curtailments. Now, I was reporting on this like all during, the whole event. Like, I mean, a lot of you remember I was talking about 100 Mile, and like 100 Mile, it was like devastating. I read like 5 or 6 articles, and I was like, man, these poor people up there, they really had nothing else up there. They had trees and mills and logging, and that was it. That's all they had up there. And so when the whole industry shut down, they got devastated. But it wasn't just because of tariffs. I mean, there was a lot of issues taking place up in the British Columbia area that, that caused the prices to not only dramatically increase, but then these mills to shut down as well once the prices had fallen. And, it started like, I mean, it's complicated, but it starts back with like, well, it started a long time ago, but really, if we just go back to like the bug infestation that took place, because really this pine mountain beetle ripped through the Canadian British Columbia forest, killing off a lot of these trees. Now, they could have either just let these trees just pretty much, stand there and rot, or they could go into what they refer to as salvage mode. And now the salvage mode was pretty easy for them, because what they did is they just lowered the stumpage fees. Now, what the Canadian government does is they put a fee for the loggers to cut the logs. So if they're cutting logs, the Canadian government gets a portion of they charge them a fee to do that. And it's called a stumpage fee. And now, in order to increase the salvage mode, they lowered the stumpage fee. When they lowered the stumpage fee, it made the logs go into the mills a lot cheaper. So the input cost going into these mills started to drop. At the same time, the prices were going up. So this was causing the mills to have like a lot of profitability, right? I mean, these mills were doing really well. Now, everything was going well until the salvage mode ended, right? Once they ended the salvage mode, all of a sudden the cost of production went up. At the same time, they're getting hit by a tariff from the United States government, which is causing the input cost on, again, to these mills, although in a roundabout way was charged to the American people, but at the time when it first hits, is causing the input cost to these mills to go up. So all these things combined started causing the mills to go into curtailments and eventually shutdowns. So this is something that was taking place just going into the 2019 year. All throughout that year, I mean, you should go and look back at my videos. I mean, we were talking about plywood mills shutting down, OSB mills shutting down, lumber mills shutting down, curtailments all across the nation. There was a huge depletion taking place during all of 2019. It started at the beginning, and then all throughout the rest of the year, leading up into the end of the year, there was this huge depletion of lumber taking place. And, as far as inventory levels go. Then COVID hits. Bang. Even more lumber shutdowns, or lumber mill shutdowns and curtailments and lumber depletions, inventory depletions. This is where the lumber prices really found their spot. Now, leading up to this, I had never experienced lumber shortages quite like what we did. Occasionally you would find like maybe you don't get a unit of plywood, or maybe there's a particular length of lumber that you weren't able to source out. Occasionally that would happen. As we were rolling in to the COVID lockdowns, I noticed that the lumber inventory levels were dramatically low. Like, trying to source out lumber was very difficult. And I noticed it first in the pressure treated lumber. In fact, I did an interview with George Gammon, I think it was towards the end of March. And in that interview, I told him then, I said, hey man, there is something going on with the pressure treated lumber. I'm having a difficult time sourcing this stuff out. And I kid you not, it was like 2 or 3 weeks later, like news articles across the nation started coming out talking about there was lumber shortages in just about every single retail yard. And it was on that video that I had reported about it first. And I noticed it with that, like I said, with the pressure treated, and it made a lot of sense to me, because if you think about it, like the pressure treated companies, they need to get that lumber first, then treat it, and then send it out. So they're like going to be the first ones who have access to the mills, because they need that product to treat. So if all of a sudden, like, the pressure treated companies are saying, hey man, I'm running in short supply here, it's because they're the first ones who had access to those mills. Well, I hadn't seen it yet, like as far as like right now. Like back then, as the COVID lockdowns were kicking in, I mean, we were running out of all kinds of pressure treated lumber. I'd never seen such a depletion in my yard. And the prices were still low at the time. That's what I was questioning. I was just like, what's going on here? Well, it didn't take very much, it didn't take much time before the prices started to really increase, and they, rose up to, all the way up to, I don't think they actually ever closed at 1,700 per thousand, but they did get up to like 1,500 per thousand, if I remember right. But it was at that point that I noticed that the pressure treated companies were starting to get their supply again. And I said, okay, that's it. The great lumber shortage was over, and that the prices were going to come down. And I was calling it way ahead of time, because I could see it there. It was taking place. So anyway, pressure treated lumber was the major indicator for me when it came to watching the shortages take place. And when you have the shortages, I knew the prices were going to rise. Now, what's taking place right now is a little different, because I'm not seeing those same shortages. Not like I did, last year, the year before, whatever it is now. Gosh, how long has it been? So Not like I was seeing before. This time I'm seeing the prices rise, and although there's like some issues as far as like availability on a lot of stuff out there, lumber for the most part has been fairly available. Um, I haven't missed out on anything pressure treated. Like everything I've ever ordered from the pressure treated company has always come in. Now, in the middle of the week, we did run out of 3/4 inch CDX. And that 3/4 CDX was difficult to source out. Nobody had any. Now, I wasn't at work on Friday, so I don't know if we ever did get our unit in. But I know that the sourcing it out was quite difficult, and the price of it, I would assume, if it's that difficult to source out, was going to go up dramatically. Now, our half-inch CDX was at $26 a sheet and is now sitting at $31 a sheet. So we're starting to see the prices, in the retail end reflect these higher future prices that are taking place. And I can imagine that if this continues, that we're gonna see these prices continue to go up. But I'm not seeing the shortages like a lot of people are reporting. Now that I am kind of in a remote area, kind of off on the coast of Oregon, so it may take a little bit of time before I start seeing the shortages like everybody else as as that ripples through the system. But it was what's taken place up in the British Columbia area right now that I think is the significant reason why we're seeing such dramatic rises in the price. And although the tariffs are probably like a major contributor to it, I think the flooding that has taken place up there and the fact that these mills are now probably going into even more like input cost in order to produce that lumber, that it's really making it more difficult for them to be productive and get that stuff into the United States. Between those like three scenarios, I can only assume that we are going to see these prices stay elevated until some sort of relief to like either the transportation issue or production, like cost going into it or something like that. I can only assume that we're probably going to see these prices elevated for some time. I don't think this is going to have much to do with a supply chain issue after we figure out what's going to go on in this flooded area and how long it takes for them to get back into production again. Now, if it takes years, like the British Columbia area is really going to be on the way out anyway. After that bug infestation, the wildfires and everything they have going on up there, really, from what I understand, it's going to take like 30 years before that particular region is back up into the production levels that they once were. So it's going to be a continual, from what I understand, it's going to be a continual like dropping of production coming from that particular area for the foreseeable future. At least for the next 30 years. At least that's from what I understand. I mean, I imagine it'll hit a low at some time. But anyhow, I've kind of rambled on enough. Thought I'd talk about lumber for you guys and just kind of give you some updates on some of the things that I am seeing. Like I said, I think the major difference between last time I saw the lumber prices moving up this fast, at this high, is that the pressure treated company was in very much short supply prior to this. This time I don't see it. However, it's very kind of reminiscent of the time that Trump increased the tariffs on Canadian lumber at a time that didn't seem reasonable. And that's kind of what I'm seeing again right now with the Biden administration. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.